Chapter 4 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 4. Treading in Perilous Places. Sunday came, as brilliant as if there were no sorrow or death or guilt in the world. A day or two of rain had made the earth fresh and brave as the blue heavens above. Ruth thought it was too strong a realization of her hopes, and looked for an overclouding at noon, but the glory endured, and at 2 o'clock she was in the Leasos, with a beating heart full of joy, longing to stop the hours which would pass too quickly through the afternoon. They sauntered through the fragrant lanes, as if their loitering would prolong the time and check the fiery-footed steeds galloping apace toward the close of the happy day. It was past 5 o'clock before they came to the great mill wheel, which stood in Sabbath idleness, motionless in a brown mass of shade, and still wet with yesterday's immersion in the deep transparent water beneath. They clambered the little hill, not yet fully shaded by the overarching elms, and then Ruth checked Mr Bellingham by a slight motion of the hand which lay within his arm, and glanced up into his face to see what that face should express as it looked on Milham Grange, now lying still and peaceful in its afternoon shadows. It was a house of afterthoughts. Building materials were plentiful in the neighbourhood, and every successive owner had found a necessity for some addition or projection, till it was a picturesque mass of irregularity, of broken light and shadow, which, as a whole, gave a full and complete idea of a home. All its gables and nooks were blended and held together by the tender green of the climbing roses and young creepers. An old couple were living in the house until it should be let, but they dwelt in the back part, and never used the front door, so the little birds had grown tame and familiar, and perched upon the window sills and porch, and on the old stone cistern which caught the water from the roof. They went silently through the untrimmed garden, full of the pale coloured flowers of spring. A spider had spread her web over the front door. The sight of this conveyed a sense of desolation to Ruth's heart. She thought it was possible the state entrance had never been used since her father's dead body had been borne forth, and without speaking a word she turned abruptly away, and went round the house to another door. Mr Bellingham followed without questioning, little understanding her feelings, but full of admiration for the varying expression called out upon her face. The old woman had not yet returned from church, or from the weekly gossip or neighbourly tea which succeeded. The husband sat in the kitchen, spelling the Psalms for the day in his prayer book, and reading the words out loud, a habit he had acquired from the double solitude of his life, for he was deaf. He did not hear the quiet entrance of the pair, and they were struck with the sort of ghostly echo which seems to haunt half-furnished and uninhabited houses. The verses he was reading were the following: "Why art thou so vexed, O my soul? And why art thou so disquieted within me? O put thy trust in God, for I will yet thank him, which is the help of my countenance and my God." And when he had finished, he shut the book, and sighed with the satisfaction of having done his duty. The words of holy trust, though perhaps they were not fully understood, carried a faithful peace down into the depths of his soul. As he looked up, he saw the young couple standing in the middle of the floor. He pushed his iron-rimmed spectacles onto his forehead, and rose to greet the daughter of his old master and ever-honoured mistress. "God bless thee, lass! God bless thee! My old eyes are glad to see thee again." Ruth sprang forward to shake the horny hand stretched forward in the action of blessing. She pressed it between both of hers as she rapidly poured out questions. Mr Bellingham was not altogether comfortable at seeing one whom he had already begun to appropriate as his own, so tenderly familiar with a hard-featured, meanly dressed day labourer. He sauntered to the window and looked out into the grass-grown farmyard, but he could not help overhearing some of the conversation, which seemed to him carried on too much in the tone of equality. "And who's yon?" asked the old labourer at last. "Is he your sweetheart?" "Your missy's son, I reckon. He's a spruce young chap, anyway." Mr Bellingham's blood of all the Howards rose and tingled about his ears, so that he could not hear Ruth's answer. It began by "Hush, Thomas, pray hush," but how it went on he did not catch. The idea of his being Mrs Mason's son! It was really too ridiculous; but, like most things which are too ridiculous, it made him very angry. He was hardly himself again when Ruth shyly came to the window recess and asked him if he would like to see the house place, into which the front door entered. Many people thought it very pretty, she said, half timidly, for his face had unconsciously assumed a hard and haughty expression, which he could not instantly soften down. He followed her, however, but before he left the kitchen he saw the old man standing, looking at Ruth's companion with a strange, grave air of dissatisfaction. They went along one or two zigzag, damp-smelling stone passages, and then entered the house place, or common sitting-room for a farmer's family in that part of the country. The front door opened into it, and several other apartments issued out of it, such as the dairy, the state bedroom, which was half parlour as well, and a small room which had been appropriated to the late Mrs Hilton, where she sat, or more frequently lay, commanding through the open door the comings and goings of the household. In those days the house place had been a cheerful room, full of life, with the passing to and fro of a husband, child, and servants, with a great merry wood fire crackling and blazing away every evening, and hardly let out in the very heat of summer; for, with the thick stone walls, and the deep window seats, and the drapery of vine leaves and ivy, that room, with its flag floor, seemed always to want the sparkle and cheery warmth of a fire. But now the green shadows from without seemed to have become black in the uninhabited desolation. The oaken shovel board, the heavy dresser, and the carved cupboards were now dull and damp, which were formerly polished up to a brightness of a looking-glass, where the fire blaze was for ever glinting. They only added to the oppressive gloom. The flag floor was wet with heavy moisture. Ruth stood gazing into the room, seeing nothing of what was present. She saw a vision of former days. An evening in the days of her childhood, her father sitting in the master's corner near the fire, sedately smoking his pipe, while he dreamily watched his wife and child; her mother reading to her as she sat on a little stool at her feet. It was gone, all gone into the land of shadows; but for the moment it seemed so present in the old room that Ruth believed her actual life to be the dream. Then, still silent, she went on into her mother's parlour; but there the bleak look of what had once been full of peace and mother's love struck cold on her heart. She uttered a cry, and threw herself down by the sofa, hiding her face in her hands, while her frame quivered with her repressed sobs. "Dearest Ruth, don't give way so. It can do no good. It cannot bring back the dead," said Mr Bellingham, distressed at witnessing her distress. "I know it cannot," murmured